My mother picked up the microphone at my brother's rehearsal dinner, not for a toast, but to clear something up in front of everyone. The room was quiet, polite, and waiting. I noticed my chair was set at the back, slightly apart, like an afterthought no one planned to explain. She spoke as if my place in the family was still under review, as if attendance came with conditions I hadn't agreed to. I stayed seated, listening, realizing this wasn't spontaneous at all. My name is Avery Collins, and that was the night something shifted, and I understood I'd never been part of the plan. Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from, and hit like and subscribe if you've ever felt betrayed by family, especially in a moment when you thought you were safe. Sometimes it helps to know someone else understands this kind of silence. I grew up in a house that always looked finished. White siding, dark shutters, a porch that never collected clutter. From the outside, it was the kind of place people slowed down to admire, the kind of home that made neighbours assume everything inside was orderly and kind. Inside, the air smelled like lemon cleaner, and whatever dinner my mother had decided would prove she was doing everything right. Denise Collins ran that house the way some people run committees. Calm voice, sharp eyes, everything in its place. Luke was the centre of it all. Even before the accident, even before anyone said it out loud, he was the axis our family spun around. At dinner, my mother filled his glass before he asked. She reminded him twice about practice times, once about homework, and never forgot to ask how his day went. When he talked, she leaned in. When I talked, she nodded without looking, the way people do when they're already thinking about something else. I learned early how not to take up space. I learned to clear plates quietly, to offer help before it was requested, to apologise even when nothing had gone wrong. My father, Mark, noticed in his own way. He'd squeeze my shoulder when my mother wasn't looking. He'd say, "You're doing great, kiddo," like it was a secret. But when my mother spoke, he folded into silence. He didn't argue. He didn't interrupt. He kept the peace by letting things stand, and I absorbed what that meant without realising it. By middle school, Luke's soccer trophies lined the mantel. Photos of him mid-kick, mid-run, frozen in victory. My report cards went into a drawer. When I made the honour roll, my mother said, "Good, keep it up." When Luke scored a goal, she called her sister and retold the play like she'd been there on the field herself. I swallowed the difference. I told myself it didn't matter. But every time I did, something small and sharp stayed behind. The night everything changed came in October, the kind of night where rain doesn't fall so much as it presses down. I was 17, a senior, college brochures stacked on my desk. Luke was 12, all legs and energy, smelling like wet grass and cheap sports drink. Our parents were out for dinner, and I was the responsible one, the driver, the caretaker. I remember checking the mirrors twice, adjusting my seat, doing everything right because that was who I was supposed to be. Halfway down Miller Hill Road, I pressed the brake pedal and felt it drop away. No resistance, no slowing, just the sick realization that something essential was missing. I pressed again, harder, as if force could make the car listen. Luke looked at me, his voice smaller than I'd ever heard it. I told him it was okay, even as my chest tightened and the world narrowed to headlights and rain-slick pavement. The impact came fast, a jolt, airbags exploding. The taste of metal and smoke. Luke, crying, his leg bent wrong, my own blood blurring my vision. The hospital lights were too bright, the hallways too long. A police officer said words I barely registered. Mechanical. Failure. I was still shaking when my parents arrived. My mother didn't look at me. She looked past me, straight to my father, and said, "She was going too fast." Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It landed heavy and final. My father didn't correct her. He didn't ask questions. He stood there, hands at his sides, and said nothing. I believed her then. I believed her because she was my mother, and because no one else said otherwise. After that night, our house was filled with visitors and casseroles. People hugged my mother and told her how strong she was. Luke's crutches leaned against the wall like an accusation. My mother answered every question about the accident herself. Avery was driving, she'd say, her mouth tight with restraint. Kids don't always think. I tried once to mention the brakes, just once, and she shut it down with a look that made my stomach drop. Your brother is hurting, she told me later. Don't make excuses. So I stopped. I stopped talking. I started apologizing. I carried that guilt like it was a job I'd been hired to do, and I did it well. Luke's recovery became the rhythm of our lives. Physical therapy 3 times a week. Early mornings that smelled like disinfectant and rubber mats. I sat in hard plastic chairs, my knees pulled in, watching him grit his teeth through exercises that looked simple and felt like torture. My mother watched me watching him. If I shifted, if I looked away, she cleared her throat softly, a reminder to stay present, to keep paying attention to what I had caused. On the drive home, she'd say things like, "Remember this," or "This is what responsibility looks like." Not angry, not screaming, just calm statements that sank deeper than shouting ever could. Luke rarely said much in the car. He stared out the window, jaw tight, and I told myself my silence was kindness. I told myself this was the price of love. High school ended. College began. I left for campus with my suitcase and that same invisible weight in my chest. I studied hard, worked part-time, and sent money home whenever I could, even when no one asked. A little transfer here, a check there. It wasn't about need. It was about reassurance. If I paid enough, maybe one day the debt would be gone. At holidays, the pattern never changed. Thanksgiving meant my mother carving the turkey and handing Luke the first plate. Christmas meant thoughtful gifts for him and practical ones for me. "You're so easy," she'd say, handing me a sweater. "I never worry about you." I smiled every time. I learned that being easy was the safest role. My father stayed the same. Quiet, reliable. He fixed things around the house, mended fences, and replaced bulbs. When we were alone, he'd ask about school, about work later on. He'd listen. But if my mother walked into the room, the conversation stopped. I noticed it more as I got older, the way he deferred, the way he let her version of events stand unchallenged. I told myself he was tired. I told myself he didn't want to make things worse. I didn't know then how much damage silence could do. Law school felt like a different world. In classrooms, facts mattered, evidence mattered. If you made a claim, you had to back it up. I loved that. I loved the structure, the fairness of it, even when it was brutal. I didn't realize until much later that I was drawn to it because my own life had never offered me proof, only accusations. When I started working in Boston, my mother introduced me as the lawyer, always with a slight edge, as if success needed to be balanced by reminding people where I came from. "She's done well," she'd say, then add, "after everything." People nodded sympathetically, and I smiled like I agreed with them. Luke and I grew closer in careful ways. We talked about movies, about his job in finance, about his plans. We didn't talk about the accident. It hovered between us like a closed door neither of us wanted to open. I told myself it was better that way. That peace, even if it was built on a mission, was still peace. Then Luke met Hannah. From the first dinner, I could tell she was different. She asked questions and waited for the answers. She noticed when my mother redirected conversations. Once, when my mother interrupted me mid-sentence to correct a detail that didn't matter, Hannah glanced at me with a small, apologetic smile. It was the first time anyone had acknowledged that pattern without saying a word. When they announced their engagement, my mother took over immediately. Guest lists, venues, budgets. Decisions framed as generosity that were really controlled. I wasn't asked to be part of the wedding party. Hannah explained it gently, saying they were keeping it small. I nodded and said I understood. My mother looked pleased. The first real crack came with the money. $50,000, delivered like an invoice, attached to my worth as a daughter and a sister. When I hesitated, the old language came back fast. Obligation, sacrifice, making things right. Every phrase sharpened the same message I'd carried since I was 17. I owed them. I always would. That was when something shifted, not all at once. Quietly, I started noticing the way my chest tightened every time my phone buzzed with my mother's name, the way my father never spoke up, even now, the way Luke asked for peace at my expense. I didn't know yet what I would do. I only knew that the story I'd lived with for 15 years suddenly felt unfinished, like there was a page missing. I didn't know it then, but that missing page was already waiting for me, sealed in an envelope I'd been too afraid to open. The week after my mother's ultimatum stretched longer than it should have. Every day felt padded with tension, like walking through a room filled with static. I went to work, sat in conference rooms with glass walls, nodded at partners, drafted contracts that moved millions of dollars without blinking. On the outside, nothing changed. On the inside, I was 17 again, bracing for punishment. My phone became the loudest object in my apartment. It buzzed on my desk during meetings. It lit up on my nightstand at midnight. My mother didn't write paragraphs. She never did when she wanted power. She wrote reminders. Have you made the transfer? Luke is counting on you. Don't do this to your father. Each message landed the same way, right under my ribs, stealing a little air. I didn't answer at first. I told myself silence was buying time. In truth, it was buying fear. I called Luke again 2 days later, this time from my car, pulled over on a quiet side street because I didn't trust myself to drive and talk. He sounded distracted, like I'd caught him between tasks. She's not letting this go, is she? He said. No, I replied. She's not. There was a pause, then the sound of him exhaling slowly. Avery, I don't want the wedding to turn into a thing. A thing? I repeated. The word felt small for what was happening. You know how she is, he said. She just wants it perfect. And where does that leave me? I asked. He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than any answer could have. I just want everyone to get along, he said finally. I closed my eyes. That usually means I'm the one who gives in. He didn't deny it. He just said, please. When the call ended, I sat there gripping the steering wheel until my hands hurt. That was the moment I understood something I'd avoided for years. Luke loved me, but he had learned the same survival skill my father had. Let the tension flow toward me. I would hold it. I always did. That weekend, my parents hosted another planning meeting. I almost didn't go. The idea of sitting at that table again made my stomach twist. But not going felt like surrender, and I wasn't ready for that either. My mother greeted me with a tight smile and a kiss that didn't land. The house smelled like roast chicken and rosemary, the kind of meal she made when she wanted everything to look generous. Hannah was there, sitting beside Luke, her hands folded in her lap. She smiled when she saw me, but her eyes searched my face like she was checking for damage. We sat. We talked about centerpieces and seating charts. My name didn't appear on any list. Not family seating, not the head table. Just a quiet omission that spoke loudly. When I finally asked where I was sitting, my mother waved a hand. You'll be comfortable, she said. It's not about you. Later, when Luke and Hannah stepped out to take a call, my mother turned to me, her voice dropping just enough to feel private. You're making this very difficult, she said. I'm trying to understand why my presence depends on a payment, I replied. She looked at me like I'd missed something obvious. Because family shows up. Family sacrifices. I have sacrificed, I said. My voice surprised me. It didn't shake. She leaned back in her chair. Not enough. That night, back in Boston, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop open. Bank accounts pulled up, numbers glowing against the dark. I could make it work, barely. I imagined wiring the money. imagined the immediate relief, the way my mother's tone would soften, the way Luke would stop sounding tired. I imagined the quiet returning. But another image followed, sharper. Me, 10 years from now, still paying, still apologizing, still waiting for a forgiveness that never came. I pushed the laptop away and pressed my palms flat against the table. My heart was racing, but underneath it was something steadier, a question I'd never let myself ask. What if the story I'd been paying for wasn't true? The thought felt dangerous, disloyal, almost cruel, but once it appeared, it didn't leave. It followed me into the shower, into bed, into the early hours when sleep wouldn't come. What if there were facts I'd never seen? By Monday morning, the question had been resolved. I called Maya and asked if she was free for coffee. When she said yes, I felt a strange mix of fear and relief, like I was stepping toward a door I'd been warned never to open. I didn't know it yet, but that decision would change the direction of everything that followed. Maya met me at our usual cafe in Cambridge, the one with mismatched chairs and a leaky faucet in the back bathroom that never quite got fixed. The place smelled like burnt espresso and cinnamon, comforting and familiar. She listened while I talked, really listened, her hands wrapped around her mug as if she were anchoring herself to the table. I told her about the ultimatum, the money, and the rehearsal dinner threat. I told her how my father kept quiet and how Luke asked me to make it easy. When I finished, she didn't rush to comfort me. She tilted her head slightly and said, "Avery, this isn't about a wedding." I let out a short, humorless breath. "I know. This is financial abuse," she said, not unkindly, "and emotional blackmail. She's using guilt and public shame to control you." The words landed hard. Abuse was a word we reserved for other families, other stories, not mine. Not the one with clean siding and polite dinners. I shook my head. "You don't understand. I did hurt him. I've been paying for that for years." Maya didn't argue. She asked a question instead. "Have you ever read the police report from the accident?" I stared at her. "No. Not a summary. Not what your parents told you. The actual report." Something in my chest tightened. The accident lived in my memory as feeling, not fact. Guilt, fear, blood on my hands. I'd never thought to look for proof. "It was 15 years ago," I said. "What would that change?" "Everything," she replied. If the facts don't match the story, you stop paying for a lie. I drove home in silence, her words echoing with every stoplight. That night, I searched the county records website until I found the number for the clerk's office. They were open weekdays until 4. I took a half day off work and told my assistant I had a personal matter. It felt strange, asking for time for myself without apologising. The records office was a squat brick building that smelled like paper and dust. The clerk typed slowly, bored, as if she were ordering lunch. "Name?" "Avery Collins," I said. "October accident, Miller Hill Road." She nodded, disappeared, and came back with a manila envelope. $15. My hands shook as I paid. I didn't open it inside. I walked out to my car, sat in the driver's seat, and stared at the envelope resting on the passenger side like it might bite me. Rain tapped lightly on the windshield. I thought about my mother's voice, my father's silence, Luke's tired "please." Then I tore it open. The words were clear, too clear. Brake failure due to manufacturing defects, driver not at fault, no citation issued. I read it once, then again, then a third time, slower. Each sentence loosened something that had been knotted tight for half my life. My chest hurt, but I didn't panic. It was grief, 15 years of punishment for something that wasn't mine. I dropped the papers onto the seat and covered my face with my hands. I laughed once, sharp and broken, then stopped. One question rose above the rest, heavy and unavoidable. Did they know? I didn't go back to Boston. I drove straight to my parents' house. My mother's car wasn't there. My father's truck was in the driveway. I found him in the garage, sanding a piece of wood, sawdust floating in the air like snow. "Dad," I said, holding up the report, "did you know about this?" He froze. The colour drained from his face. He set the sander down carefully, like noise would make things worse. "Avery, did you know it wasn't my fault?" My voice cracked despite my effort to keep it steady. He looked at the floor. "It was complicated." "That's not an answer." He rubbed his forehead. "The car came from your mother's cousin. If it went to court, it would have been ugly. The insurance company had questions. Your mom She didn't want a mess," I finished. "So you let me believe I ruined my brother's life." "We thought it would be easier," he said quietly. "You were strong. You'd move on." I stared at him, the man who taught me to ride a bike, who held doors open, who never once held this truth out to me. "I built my entire life around fixing something I didn't break," I said. "And you let me." He couldn't look at me. That was the moment something finally broke clean in two. I left without saying goodbye. In my car, I called Tom Gallagher, our family attorney. When he agreed to meet, his tone was serious. I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Support. I didn't know how or when I would use what I'd found. I only knew this. I wasn't walking into that rehearsal dinner empty-handed anymore. The rehearsal dinner was held at Riverside Manor, a long room of glass and white linen overlooking the river. The kind of place designed to make everything feel calm, even when it isn't. Candlelight softened the edges of faces. Silverware clinked. Laughter floated just high enough to sound convincing. I arrived on time because being late would have given my mother something to point at, something small to label as another failure. My place card waited near the back. Not with Luke, not with Hannah, not with my parents. A neat separation, a quiet message. I sat down, smoothed my dress, and set my bag carefully on the chair beside me. Inside it, the manila envelope rested flat, heavier than paper had any right to be. Luke spotted me first. He crossed the room and hugged me, tight and quick, like he was afraid I might disappear. "You came," he said. "Of course," I replied. "I wouldn't miss this." Hannah joined us, her smile warm but nervous. "I'm really glad you're here," she said softly, and I believed her. That mattered more than she probably knew. My mother moved through the room like she owned it. Burgundy silk, perfect hair. A smile that landed where she wanted it to. My father hovered near the bar with a drink he hadn't finished, his shoulders drawn in. When he saw me looking, he glanced away. Dinner passed in fragments. I tasted nothing. My attention stayed fixed on my mother, the way you watch a storm line inch closer across open water. I knew what was coming. I just didn't know how she would frame it. After dessert, she stood and lifted the microphone. The room quieted immediately. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice smooth, practiced. "Luke and Hannah, we're so grateful to celebrate with you." She spoke about Luke's determination, his resilience, his character. Heads nodded, smiles held. Then she shifted, the way someone does when they're about to change the subject without announcing it. "Many of you know Luke faced significant challenges as a teenager," she said. "A car accident when he was just 12 years old, 2 years of physical therapy, lost opportunities." The air tightened. I felt eyes turning, curious now. "But he worked through it," she continued. "He never gave up." Applause rippled. Luke's smile was fixed, uncomfortable. "And tonight," my mother said, her gaze finding me with precision, "I want to acknowledge someone else who's been part of that journey. My daughter, Avery." Every head turned. Heat rushed to my face, but I stayed still. "Avery has done very well for herself," she went on. "A lawyer in Boston, very successful." A pause. Just long enough. "And we've been discussing how she might want to contribute to Luke's wedding to show her support." The room went silent in a different way, expectant, watching. "Avery?" my mother asked into the microphone. Have you made that transfer? I stood. My chair scraped loudly against the floor. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Mom, I said evenly, this isn't appropriate. Her smile didn't falter. Everyone here is family. They deserve to know. I'm not paying $50,000, I said, a collective intake of breath. Murmurs. Luke half rose from his seat. My mother's tone cooled. After what you did to your brother, you don't think you owe him? I took one breath, then another. Let's talk about what actually happened. Her jaw tightened. Everyone knows what happened. You were careless. You hurt him. That was the moment. I reached for my bag. The envelope came out cleanly. I held it up so the letterhead caught the light. This is the police report from the accident, I said. My mother's face changed, just for a flicker. Fear, then anger. This is not the time. It's the only time, I replied. I opened the report and read. My voice steady, professional, the voice I use when facts matter. Cause of accident. Brake failure due to manufacturing defect. Driver not at fault. No citation issued. The room went still. Utterly still. Luke stood fully now. What? I didn't know until last week, I said, turning to him. I believed it was my fault too. My mother tried to interrupt. You're taking this out of context. Tom Gallagher rose from his table. May I see that? He asked. I handed him the report. He scanned it once, then faced the room. This is an official police document, he said. It's clear. The accident was caused by a mechanical defect. Avery was not at fault. Then he turned to my parents. Did you know this? My father stared at his plate. My mother said nothing. Luke's voice broke. Mum? She opened her mouth. I closed it. It was complicated, she said finally. Did you know? Luke pressed. Silence. My father spoke, quiet and exhausted. We knew the report said that. The car came from Denise's cousin. It would have turned into a lawsuit, a mess. A murmur rolled through the room. Disbelief, disapproval. Luke shook his head slowly. You let her think. He couldn't finish. I looked at my mother. Did you need me to be guilty? I asked softly. Or did you just need someone to carry it? She gripped the microphone, then set it down with a sharp click. She didn't answer. She turned and walked out, heels striking the floor, the door swinging shut behind her. The room exhaled all at once. Luke crossed to me, eyes wet. I'm so sorry, he said. I didn't know. I know, I replied, and for the first time in 15 years, I meant it without an apology. I stood there, the report still in my hand, feeling something unfamiliar settle in my chest. Not victory. Not revenge. Clarity. I didn't stay long after that. The room had shifted, conversations restarting in careful tones, people avoiding my parents' table like it was suddenly unstable ground. Luke hugged me again, longer this time, his grip tight like he was afraid I might slip away if he loosened it. Hannah squeezed my hand and whispered, Thank you for telling the truth. And I nodded because my throat wouldn't cooperate. I stepped outside onto the terrace overlooking the river. The night air was cool, damp with the smell of water and cut grass. For a moment I just stood there, breathing, letting my heart slow down. I'd imagined this moment in so many ways over the years. I'd imagined anger, shouting, even satisfaction. What I felt instead was quiet, the kind that comes when something heavy finally drops out of your hands. My phone vibrated, a text from my father. I'm sorry, I should have protected you. I stared at it for a long time before sliding the phone back into my purse. Sorry, I didn't rewind 15 years. It didn't give me back the girl who learned too young how to disappear. But it was something. Maybe the first honest thing he'd said in a long time. Another vibration came almost immediately after, this one from my mother. You think you know everything now, it reads. You only saw what they wanted you to see. I read it twice. Slowly. There was no apology, no denial either. Just that familiar undertone of control, of withheld information, like a door she was still guarding. For the first time, it didn't scare me. It sharpened my focus. Tom Gallagher stepped outside a few minutes later, adjusting his jacket against the cold. He stood beside me, looking out at the dark water. "There's more paperwork tied to that accident," he said quietly. "Insurance correspondence, signatures. Someone made sure it never went further." I didn't ask who. I already knew. Inside, the celebration was continuing without its architect. Laughter sounded thinner now, less confident. I thought about the money I'd sent over the years, the transfers I never questioned, the way my mother had always insisted on handling things herself. I thought about that missing page Tom had mentioned, about what it might reveal if I finally followed the trail all the way through. I turned back toward the glass doors, toward the room I'd just walked out of. They thought tonight was the end of it. They thought the worst thing that could happen was the truth coming out at dinner. They were wrong, because the truth doesn't stop once it's spoken. It starts asking for everything else. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, the one expected to stay quiet so everyone else could be comfortable, subscribe. This story isn't over. Sometimes the hardest part isn't confronting the truth out loud. It's deciding what to do once you finally hear it. Tell me in the comments if you would have walked away after that dinner, or if you would have followed the trail a little further. And if this feels familiar, stay with me. There's more to come.